Hi, I'm Jenny Ray, the Managing Director of Management Consulted, and today I'm doing the final deep dive as a part of our case interview series on communication, one of the key traits that you have to demonstrate in order to convince the interviewer that you are a future consultant in the making. In particular, today I'm going to break it down into 4 different ways that you can demonstrate communication very specifically throughout the interview, and you can understand not only what to do, but also, more importantly, potentially what not to do. These come from insights that we've seen across the board with a whole bunch of our candidates as we're training them for case interview excellence. So make sure that you pay close attention. Without further ado, let's talk about the first thing. When you're communicating, it's incredibly important that you provide concise and well-spoken responses to each question. The person who is really good at this kind of communication isn't rambling. They're focusing on just using words directly and clearly to make sure that they're identifying the key issues. This type of person uses summaries. Sometimes if they find themselves going a little bit into a development process where they're just working things out verbally, they bring it all back together at the end in a summary that makes it look like they planned it all along. And finally, the type of person who uses these concise words and summaries directly as they're moving through the process is constantly talking, but with focus. I often serve on panels when I'm traveling to different universities. And as a moderator or a member of these panels, one of the most common questions we get asked is, what is the most important thing that you see from a successful case interview? And one of the things that is consistently mentioned across all the panels is that a successful case interviewer is always talking. They're always walking me through the way that they're thinking about something, but that doesn't mean that they're rambling, that they're chattering on, or that they're expounding on something to the point where I'm done way before they are. So make sure that as you're going through the process, you're keeping it straightforward and clear, and that if you're ever not doing that, that you're pulling it all back together in a summary. Some key mistakes that we see in this area, I've already touched on a little bit here. The first issue that we often see is that someone has taken time when they're going through the case interview practice process to answer each question, and they can't think on their feet. What this leads to is a lot of rambling, a lot of confusion, and a lot of just general nattering on without any focus. And oftentimes they've just relied on their ability to collect their thoughts for a minute in order to come out with something composed. You need to practice being able to do this on the fly, and it does often take practice. So make sure that you don't practice by giving yourself time to digest every problem, but you just start talking. The second thing that's really important to focus on is that you must ask clear questions. If you ask open-ended questions, it's going to lead you down rabbit holes that you never want to be down. You'll waste time and you'll really lose the ability to focus on the most important issues in the case. So don't ask open-ended questions. Ask clear, data-driven, and focused questions as you're moving through the case. And then finally, make sure that you show client empathy. This is kind of a funny one, but a lot of times people get so excited to solve a problem that they'll say, guess what? You, the client, are really falling behind in this one area. And it makes it sound like you as the consultant are excited about it. Now we know that as the interviewer, you're probably just excited about having discovered the answer, but it's really important that after you discovered the answer, you demonstrate that you understand where the client's coming from, what their concerns are, and how you can appropriately address those. One part of communication here is just really making sure that you're talking in a way that the client will receive clear and concise statements, and also with messages that they will make sure that they understand. The second thing that's critical for communication is making sure that you work through difficulty with a positive attitude. A lot of communication is just the type of attitude that someone conveys in an interview. Somebody who's a can-do person conveys a can-do attitude. Somebody who gets frustrated easily is a perfectionist who doesn't like it when they make mistakes and beats themselves up over it. It's not attractive in the actual case interview process. So make sure that you have a can-do attitude when you're walking through the case interview process, because that will go a long way. Now, I'm not talking about just fluffy, happy can-do attitude. I'm talking about practical, pedal to the metal can-do attitude. I'm not just talking about like, I'm sure we can solve this case and then fluffing along until later you're not actually able to solve it. I'm talking about the type of person who can take a moment, address an issue, make sure that they address it appropriately, and then move on. So the type of person who has a can-do attitude is the type of person that I would have wanted to hire when I was working at consulting firms, and that every consultant that has somebody working for them currently or will have somebody working for them in the future wants on their team. The next thing is that you want to make sure that you're demonstrating that you're having fun when you're walking through the case. If you're having fun in the case, again, not gleeful, blissful fun that the client is having a problem, but fun in terms of you're invigorated by the challenge and excited by the issues. Having fun in the case is a great sign that you're going to really like the job as a consultant. So make sure that you don't come across in one of the following ways, which are key mistakes you could make in this area. The first is don't come across as though you're getting frustrated and showing it. So it's okay to get frustrated and to find that moment to regroup and kind of nut down on the key issue that's facing you with extra vigor. But getting frustrated and throwing your toys or just flailing out and looking for a whole bunch of potential issues is not a good way to go about it. So make sure that you don't get visibly frustrated inside the interview. The second is not regrouping when necessary. A lot of times people will go through the case and they'll just get frustrated or come up with an issue and they will constantly just continue to beat on it without ever stopping. The most critical moment in a case might be when somebody says, you know what, I think I'm really headed down the wrong path here. I don't think that there's anything fruitful there. Let me just quickly go back to my original structure and revisit where we're going to go. That moment might help us actually save the case from what could have been a disastrous performance. And the final thing, which should seem obvious, but you would be amazed at how many people do it, is quitting. Do not quit in the cases. Oftentimes, if an interviewer, especially in later rounds, is really turning up the pressure, that what that means is that you're onto something, that they really want to understand how you think about things. So if you throw your toys, you get frustrated, you just keep pushing on issues and get more and more frustrated, and then ultimately you quit, you could have been on the track to an offer, but you're throwing it all away. So make sure that you don't quit in the process, but that you just take a step back and reassess whenever you need to. The third piece of communication that's really critical is I am identifying as the interviewer whether I would like to work with you and manage you as a candidate. And the way that you communicate with me is going to really show how appropriate you understand our relationship should be and what you're going to bring to the table. The ultimate question in the interview is, would I want to have this person on their first case on the job? In fact, in many final round interviews, this is the ultimate question that the interviewers have to answer. They're not trying to figure out how good you are at 16 different things. They're trying to just figure out the answer to this one question. Would I want this person on my team tomorrow? And as a part of that, it's really critical that you're communicating in a way that makes it seem like I'm going to understand your process, I'm going to believe what you say, and I'm going to recognize that you are a thinking and contributing individual on my team. The second way that you can really show that you're going to be the type of person who's fun to manage is making sure that you smile and relax when you're in the interview. Again, you don't want to smile in a way that looks like you're super happy that the client has a disastrous problem, but you want to smile in a way that acknowledges that you see that the client has a problem, you've got the solution, and all it's going to take is 20 minutes of the interviewer's time to make sure that you find it together. You should show, again, here that the case invigorates you, not that you're beaten down by it or terrified by it. You should show that you have the ability to really address the problem and break it down and do so in a timely manner. Some key mistakes that we see in this area. First is being too serious. If you are a great person at doing cases, but you are too serious and I wouldn't want to have a beer with you after we're done with the case, this is a problem. So one of the key issues is making sure that you're the type of person who is taking everything at an appropriate level of seriousness, but not with the gravity and the intensity that makes me not want to be around you. The second is acting terrified. If you act terrified, I will believe that you probably will not be able to solve my problems for me. If you act terrified in front of a client, they will also think the same thing. So I don't want to see you act terrified. I want to see you act confident that you're going to be able to work through this, break it down, and solve the problem. And then finally, if you treat the interviewer with either too much formality or too little formality, if you treat them like a buddy, or if you treat them like Mr. CEO, somebody that's not approachable and not in a collaborative way, you probably won't understand how a lot of the firms work hand in hand with their clients in order to solve problems. So make sure that as you're working with them and as you're communicating with them, you're including them in your thought process, you're asking them direct and appropriate questions whenever needed, but you're also taking a lot of ownership so that you're working hand in hand with the interviewer to solve the problem. The fourth and final trait that is incredibly important when it comes to communication is confidence. You can probably forego almost everything else that I said. Structure, problem solving, and communication if you get this one thing right. If you can convey confidence, you're not only going to make it from the first to the second round, but you're also going to land the job. And confidence does spill over into other areas. If you're confident, you're more easily able to structure. If you're confident, you're more easily able to do the math and problem solve inside the case. But confidence is the most important trait that you can exhibit, especially in your communication style when you're walking through the case. Now, ultimately, everything comes down to this. When you're working with a client in real life for consulting, your ability to tell them how emphatically you believe that your solution is the right one for them, and your ability to drive them to implement it, is a measure of your success as a consultant. Here, the same thing is true. Can you walk me through the problem? Can you solve it for me? And can you convince me as an interviewer that this is the right solution for me? You also have to make sure, as you're going through this, that you're confident enough to have the composure to ask the right questions. We've already talked about asking too many questions or asking general questions, but the right questions, well-timed and very insightful, can be incredibly helpful in demonstrating confidence in a case. In fact, the best consultants are the ones who can ask 3 to 5 questions of any client and ultimately get directed toward what they think the answer is going to be. So make sure that you are identifying these 2 traits. Now, key mistakes that we see in the realm of confidence, and these come up all the time. The first one, we call it boiling the ocean. It's when you're not sure where to focus and you try to do everything. Boiling the ocean is a key problem in cases because you waste time and you don't focus on the key issues. You're not demonstrating confidence when you're looking at everything. You're going to have to pick and choose. So make sure that you're developing as you're training for cases and understanding of what's important to clients, what the key issues are that consistently come up, and how most accurately you can go through solving them. The second thing is not knowing when to move on. A lot of people really overinvest in the first section of their case. They don't know when to identify that that section doesn't really have a lot of fruitfulness to it and they can move on. Look, in cases, you can always go back if you miss something. So make sure that you know when the appropriate timing is to move on to other areas. It's more than likely that what will happen is that you'll discover that the real nut of the case is actually later on, and you weren't missing it, but you were just pushing on an area that was not going to bear any fruit. But it is really important to make sure that you understand that skill and that you don't fall into the trap of not moving on when it's appropriate to do it. And the final thing with confidence is not rising to the challenge when you're tested. If I question you, make sure that you come back at me with a thorough explanation of how you were thinking, but also an appropriate reconsideration of it. When I say rising to the challenge, I don't mean, like I said earlier, defending to the death. That's not what I'm looking for. I don't want you to back me into a corner. I'm also not looking for you to just fall over and say, oh yeah, I realize I'm totally wrong and wasn't right at all and have no idea what I'm doing. What you want to do is some balance between the two where you say, here's what I was thinking when I was going through the process this way. I realize now that there's some other ways that we could think about it. Lay out those on the table and then see where the interviewer wants to take it. It'll show that you're confident in your approach, that you had a reasoning behind what you did, but also that you're flexible to move on. If you can pull all of this together, making sure that you're clearly communicating, making sure that you're going back and correcting any issues that you've got when you've got them, making sure that you're very clearly walking somebody through your entire thought process, and finally exhibiting confidence throughout the whole interview that you've got this on behalf of the client, you're going to solve their problem, you are going to become an excellent case interviewee. As you're walking through the process, make sure that as you're practicing, you are talking consistently, that you're getting your thoughts out in the air, and that you're learning to balance what you're thinking and what you're speaking as you go through the process. Because great communication as a consultant is a learned skill, not necessarily something that you have to have naturally. So as you're going through the process, if you need more assistance, we've got great resources for you. The first is our Consulting Interview Bible. The second are our one-on-one prep sessions where you can test out your skills with us. And finally, we've got tons of articles and great free content on the web at managementconsulted.com.